Um, those of you in class today, we're going to be taking a few notes. I'll try to get through this in maybe 25 minutes or so. Those of you on Zoom, just a heads up, we're going to be taking a few notes today on the Aztec and the Inca, and then we'll have kind of an activity to do with it tomorrow, and we'll move forward from there. Okay, so I just want to make sure you guys are aware of what's going on here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you soon here. I just got an email without an attachment. Always love those. Doesn't make any sense. All right, so here's what I was hoping we could do today. And that is, there's 3 questions on the board. I want you to take a look at the 3 questions, those of you here and in Zoom. And I want you to answer one of these in the chat function if you're on Zoom. If you are in person, we're just going to have a quick discussion, all right? What do you know about the Americas prior to 1450 CE? So the reason why we use 1450 is that's right around the time Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire, and shortly after that, Christopher Columbus would sail to the Americas and change it quite a bit, okay? What advantages did it have over Afro-Eurasia, so Africa, Europe, and Asia? And then what disadvantages did it have from Afro-Eurasia? So take a look at one of those 3 questions, answer in the chat function, and we're going to mute here for about 2 minutes, have a quick discussion here in class. What do we know about the Americas prior to 1450? There were Native American populations in North and Central and South America. Advantages was that They had staple food crops that that were very valuable to the rest of the world. Disadvantages, there were quite a few, but lack of large animals for food population, lack of steel, lack of the use of the wheel. So, okay, those are 3 things for you there to think about. All right, we're gonna move on now. So, in the chat function, at least one time, the 14 of you that are on here, I need you guys to post. I got 2 people that have posted something. I need you to post something by the end of class, okay? All right, so we're going to take a look today at the Aztec and the Inca, okay? And the Aztec are basically around today what is known as Central Mexico. If you look up here on the screen, those of you in class and those of you on Zoom, the civilization of the Maya, which you learned about in middle school, okay, large temples. They created a kind of like the first game of basketball, and they set up basically the religion that most people in Central Mexico and Central America would practice. That was kind of a copy of what is known as the Toltecs, which you see are a little bit further to the north. So these civilizations kind of developed alongside each other. The Maya would disappear due to a lack of well, they think it was because of a drought that occurred, but the who would take their power in the Central Valley of Mexico would be the people known as the Mexica, or more traditionally called the Aztecs. Okay, you've probably heard of them, like I said, from middle school. Okay, a few things about the Aztecs then. If you've ever seen the flag of Mexico before, it has a feathered serpent standing on top of a cactus. It's an eagle standing on top of a cactus with a serpent in its mouth. And that is on the flag of Mexico today. And according to legend, the Aztecs and the Aztec warriors saw this in Lake Texcoco around 1325 CE. And that was when they inhabited Mexico, okay, or what was Lake Texcoco, okay? And it was a lake, but it was more like a swamp, okay? It was a lake that was about 6 to 8 feet deep, and it was hundreds of miles wide, right in the central part of Mexico, what is today modern-day Mexico. And so on this lake, because it was where they could make food, that was where they founded a city known as Tenochtitlan. Okay, you want to jot that down. It's definitely in your intro as well. But Tenochtitlan, to this day is one of the most famous cities in the world. Okay, what city is it today? New Mexico is a state in the United States. You're close. One of those words and add a city on the end. There you go. It is Mexico City today, and it boasts a population, I believe, of over 18 million people, and it's not on a lake anymore. Okay, it's concrete heaven. It's been built up over what was this lake. Okay, so the empire here, they took a while to kind of build their civilization, and so they were just hitting their strength when the Europeans arrived, and the Europeans would destroy almost all of their culture. Okay, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay? I didn't want to try to do that this week. Aztec kings, then, the people who lived here, had a king, and that king was basically a representative of one of the 128 gods on earth. Okay, so they viewed the king as the living god. All right. The government of the Aztecs, this is kind of different than other places we've talked about. So they were a group of city-states. It wasn't organized like the empires like we've talked about, like Rome or China or even like India or the Muslim empires. And then the great speaker was the king, and again, kind of acted like a living god. And then instead of trying to go around and conquer all the other smaller tribes around them, they allowed the smaller tribes to be independent as long as they paid tribute. Okay, and tribute is like paying gold, could be in corn, and oftentimes because of this cult that they had, called the cult of war and sacrifice, they would have to pay in lives. They'd have to give up young men, okay, which would be used for cannibalism, okay, or for a sacrifice to the gods, which then would be eaten. We'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so the religion of the Aztecs then, they had accumulated a very large set of gods from the Toltecs, the Olmecs, and the Mayas. And so they had a complex set of 128 different gods. But the most important of these 128 gods was the god, or the patron god of the cult of warfare and sacrifice. Huitzil, hard for me to say this one, excuse me. Huitzilopochtli, okay? Huitzilopochtli, you can see again a picture on the right-hand side. And this god had to be, to praise or worship this god, they had to kill people, sacrifice human people, they believed, to honor and worship the god of war and sacrifice, and that would bring them good fortune. Okay, but on top of that, there were 127 other gods as well. So you imagine religion was very important to them, especially with so many different gods. And there was a sun god, fertility god, etc. Okay. Now, as the civilization got stronger, their soldiers got stronger as well, and people like neighboring tribes became very scared of them because of this practice known as human sacrifice. So if you guys are here with me, if you look on the picture on the left, you'll see a depiction. This is a European depiction of the practice of the high priest tearing out the heart, and then flailing the body down the pyramid. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right. Now, this was a reason. This was a worship to the gods. People sometimes think it's really barbaric. They're like, Mr. Brunette, I can't believe they would do this. Well, we've already seen that people do a lot of crazy things for religion anyways. Okay. So the Aztec will continue to do this. And they use this cult, and all the men that are in this cult, they use them as basically warriors to go out and collect humans to sacrifice. And they call this the flowery death, or the flowery wars, because they weren't really wars. All they were the Aztecs going in, crushing their neighbors, taking men, keeping them in cages, and then when it was their turn to sacrifice, they would sacrifice them. Now, why did this make sense? Well, politically, they would make sure that their enemies knew who the boss was. Okay? Their enemies wouldn't come take them over. Population-wise, this meant that they didn't have to feed too many people if they were always killing each day so many people and sacrificing each day. And then 3, this is, again, not totally backed up by history because our sources are crummy because they're European sources. But this is a cannibal kingdom, meaning the warriors that captured people in war and got to keep them in cages, they then got to eat these people. Okay? Because there was think about this. There wasn't a large animal to provide food. There was no pig. There was no cow. There was no sheep. There was no goat. Okay? And so because there was so little protein, this was a means to get some protein. All right, got a video for us here. It's kind of gory. It's interesting, though, for sure. I think I'm going to have to switch to screen share for a second here.
But if you want to write essays that inspire,
all right, I'm going to go ahead and I got to get out of this. And I need to pull this over, which I will do. And we're going to share the screen. It's only it's like 3-minute video, 2.5-minute video, but this is about the art of how they would sacrifice these humans. Again, it's a little bit barbaric, but again, part of their religion also. So here we go. Taking a look at it. And I got to make sure, share the screen. There we go. All right. Francesca, can you see? Okay, great. Here we go. Chris, think you could take down the fourth light so we can see a little better? There we go.
This is a rendering of a human sacrifice being conducted by a 15th century Aztec priest. And if you'll wonder whether the heart was still beating when they yanked it out of the victim's chest, the answer is yes. I wouldn't want to be the victim of a priest who was just learning how to do this, because I'm sure it took an awful long time for that person to die. But once the priest got pretty good, I imagine they probably went in and got the heart out in 30 seconds. Aztec culture involved human sacrifice. Evidence indicates the Aztecs may have been murdering as many as 20,000 victims a year. I think the Aztecs had a terrific understanding of human anatomy. When they decided to sacrifice their victims, they knew it was going to be a lot easier to get into the chest cavity by making a hole in the abdominal wall and getting at the heart than trying to get through the breastplate, the sternum, and the ribs, which was very difficult to saw through. The victims were held down by 4 people, and the priest would take a knife while the victim was still alive, plunge it right into the abdomen, rip open the abdomen with the knife, and made a hole big enough to get their arm in, put their arm in, pierce through the diaphragm, pushing their hand up into the chest. And the heart is the only thing in the chest that's going to be going like this, and beating. It feels different than the surrounding tissue. The average adult human heart is around the size of a small grapefruit and pretty much weighs around the same and has that kind of feeling right now. So the priest would reach around until he felt the beating heart, grab onto it, and then just pull for all it was worth until he yanked it off its attachment. I have no doubt that the victim felt the priest's hand in his abdomen and the hand ripping through the diaphragm, which was, I am sure, exquisitely painful. And I have no doubt that the victim felt his heart being ripped from its attachment. But at that time, the victim would lose consciousness. The reason is, as the heart was being compromised, blood flow to the brain would stop. The brain just doesn't have the capacity to maintain consciousness without that blood flow. Most people think that if you pulled somebody's heart out of their body, that it wouldn't still be beating, but in fact, it absolutely would. The heart has what's called inherent rhythmicity, meaning that the muscle cells of the heart beat on their own and don't require input from the brain to beat. So if you get a heart out of a human body quickly enough, say within a few seconds, it absolutely will still be beating when you're holding.
Okay. What'd you guys find interesting from that? Heart still beating when you take it out of the body. That's pretty crazy, right? You think that'd be painful? Yeah. One of the things they did that they didn't mention in here is that they would give these young men who were being sacrificed, they'd give them coca leaves. Okay, which is how you make cocaine today. They give them coca leaves to deaden their pain, so then they wouldn't necessarily have to feel it. All right, so You can imagine when the Europeans arrived about 50 years after this, and they saw this practice, that they thought it was pretty barbaric, and they definitely judged them, and that was one of the reasons why they didn't have a hard time killing them. They said, well, these are barbaric people, but in reality, it was just how their culture and their sacrifice, their war and their religion developed. Okay, here's a skull pyramid or skull rack that would be kept outside a noble's house. The more captives that you had and able to sacrifice, the higher you got in the cult of war and sacrifice, and the more well looked upon you were. Here's the Great Pyramid in Tenochtitlan, which would have been just covered in blood. I think they did a calculation that one every, I want to say like 19 or 20 people a day were sacrificed year round. Okay, you can imagine that's a lot. Okay, so you can imagine when the Europeans got here how much blood and different things were stained on this Great Pyramid in the middle of their capital city. Okay, which would look pretty crazy. All right, so the actual city itself, if you take a look at this on the right, this is a map of Tenochtitlan, okay, Mexico City to this day. It was literally a set of floating islands they built the city on, okay? And to go around the city, you had canoes that you would use, and you didn't walk around the city. And only like the highest nobles had their houses in the city. Everyone else had their houses off the lake, not on the mainland. And then to get into the city, you can see there are bridges called causeways. And when they went to war, they were able to take down these bridges and then actually turn them into make sure that you couldn't invade the city, okay, unless you had boats. Population of 150,000 people. It was larger than any European city at that time, and safer as well. Okay, here's another picture called the Venice, like Venice, Italy. If you've ever seen Venice, it has canals like this as well, but they take gondolas, not canoes, in and out. All right, so in terms of their economy, they did have some long-distance trade, but primarily they provided their own food, and it was corn by using this thing called chinampas. You want to jot this word down, okay? Chinampas. And chinampas are floating islands in Lake Texcoco where they would basically set up a system of reeds and trees to make like a marshy type, like grass substance, where they could then plant corn up to 5 times a year. Okay, so 5 cycles of corn a year. How many times can we grow corn in the United States per year? 1 if we have a good year, right? There's no drought. If it rains somewhat consistently, fertilizers work there. They could yield 5 times a year corn in these chinampas. Okay, because of their proximity to the equator and the system that they had where they were constantly being nourished. I'll show you what this looks like in a second here. Instead of having like gold or silver be a currency, they use cocoa beans and gold dust, and sometimes feather plumes like from a bird. All right, here's what a chinampa looked like. Okay, some of you might use this for your definitions for drawing tomorrow. 17 feet long by 100 to 300 feet wide. So huge. And this is how they actually built them in the island. There were hundreds of thousands of acres of these chinampas in the island, okay, that traditionally women would attend to. And then once the corn was done, they would grind it, and this was their staple diet, obviously. Corn, you guys know what tortillas are made out of corn. Okay, you can grind it up, turn it into food. All right, we're gonna move on there. A little bit about women. Again, women were spent grinding corn mostly because of the amount of corn that they consumed year round, 6 hours a day. Polygamy existed with the nobility, but women could inherit property, which was more rights than Islamic women at that time. Okay. All right. So this is a little bit about the Aztecs. We're gonna move on then. Okay. All right. Everybody on Zoom, go ahead, stand up, take a little bit of a breather. Guys in class, stand up. Some of you are sleeping. Take 30 seconds to catch your breath. Do whatever you need to do. Send your text if you need to. Okay, and then we'll come back in a second here. Okay, everyone looks like they need a break. If we can get this done, we will. We don't have to. They said we can move on to another activity tomorrow. All right, guys, good? We're good? All right, so second civilization that was probably just as famous as any European or African or Chinese civilization at that time are the Inca. Okay, if you look on the map of the Inca, it stretched from modern day Bolivia all the way up to modern day Peru. And it basically was a civilization that was in the mountains, in the Andes Mountains. Okay, the language they spoke was called Quechua. There's a small group of people in modern day Bolivia that still speak this language. Okay, it's not a dead culture. Even though the Europeans destroyed almost all of this Aztec and Inca culture, this is one that's still around. Okay, and they founded their capital city at what was called Cuzco. Cuzco's in modern day Peru. It's about a city of about 350,000 people. Maybe a little bit bigger than the city of like size of Fort Wayne today, so not a huge city, but it was because the Spanish would move the capital from Cuzco to a city called Lima, which has about 11 million people today. That's why you probably never heard of Cuzco, okay? But the Quechua-speaking people did not have a writing system. We're going to kind of look at that in a second. Their writing system was just a record-keeping way of by using knots to keep track of records instead of writing things down. The most famous ruler who built Machu Picchu for his death was known as Pachacuti. And they had this way of ruling where when they died, all of their possessions went to the ruler, stayed with him in this place called Machu Picchu. And then the new ruler had to go out and conquer all this land, okay, so he could become rich and it would be buried with him as well. So here's a picture of Machu Picchu. Some of you maybe have seen this. It's one of the most impressive things in the world. I have not been here. It's, again, outside of Cusco. It is about 13,000 feet high in the Andes Mountains. Take a look at that, okay? This is what it's been kind of restored to. It wasn't found until the late 1800s. So for 400 some years, it just sat there, and it was a secret. Like the people who got conquered by by Pizarro and the Spaniards kept it secret. And I believe it was an American professor, I want to say from either Yale or Columbia, that found it on a trip here. And since then, it's been restored, and it's one of the top 10 most visited places in the world to this day. Okay, but this was the grave site of the emperor, and all of these buildings were built out of what's called dry stone masonry. I'm going to show you how impressive that is in a second. But unlike Roman buildings, that a lot of them still existed because they used concrete, they didn't use concrete. They didn't have any little like substance between the rocks. They cut the rocks out perfectly, so they literally stood on top of themselves without any type of, again, like glue or anything in between them, which is hard to do. Any of you try to go out and build a rock wall without concrete, I'm going to laugh at you because it's not going to stand for very long, okay? Someone will probably come kick it down. Okay, also, they did this without a wheel. How did they get all those rocks and everything up there and those stones? Literally, people carrying them. Okay, there were not large pack animals. The largest pack animal they had was a alpaca or a llama. That's not real big. Okay, they practiced, I was kind of telling you this, and it's underlined, it's a vocab word you probably want to know. There's your hint. But they were motivated by this thing called split inheritance, which meant whenever a king or the emperor died, they were buried with all of their wives and all of their gold, all of their possessions. And their next son was given the title, but no land or nothing with it. So he had to go out and conquer, and that's why they became so big so quickly. They were also polytheistic, Inti, the sun god and main god, and they were a little bit more influenced by animism, not quite the same set of gods that the Inca had, not as basically not as organized. The religion wasn't. I'm not going to go into too much of their government other than the Sapa Inca, who was the leader. The emperor was known as a god also. And then their noble people, like the most noble men, were all of the ones that were from the local areas around Cusco. Cusco was the place. All right, their economy. This are a couple things on here that I wanted you to pick up. They too were primarily agricultural, meaning they just farmed, even though they didn't have good farmlands. They're in the mountains. They used this thing called terrace farming. Chinese did it too. So did the Vietnamese, but it's unbelievable when I show you these pictures. So they would capture the water at the top of a mountain, and then they had a system where it would porously go through each terrace, allowing them to farm on the side of a mountain that got more rain. You know how one side of a mountain gets more rain than the other side. All right. They come up with 200 different types of potatoes. You'll see some of these. We have, like, if anyone goes to the store, if you buy potatoes, you can buy like Yukon Gold potatoes. Sometimes you can buy like crazy purple ones now. That's because of, again, the Inca introduced that. And then the last thing here, Inca socialism. So instead of collecting taxes in payment like money, they collected taxes in work, called the Midas system. Okay, where each group of people would have to pay taxes for a month or 3 months, depending on where you were, where you would have to go farm someone else's land, or you might have to go serve in the military, or you might have to weave cloth if you're a woman for someone. And that was your tax instead of paying in money. Okay, here's what the potatoes look like. Take a look at some of these crazy potatoes. Obviously, this would change the world once these potatoes became common around the world. They're the most common side dish I always joke about. Either something corn related, rice related, or potato related. Here's terrace farming. Okay, you can see how elaborate this is and how difficult it would be to make. You see how it's on one side of the mountain, not the other, because one side of the mountain gets rain, the other one does not. When clouds come over and deposit moisture. And so that was how they provided food. And then using the Midas system, in less than 100 years, they were able to make 2,500 miles of roads, okay, throughout the Andes Mountains that still exist to this day in Bolivia and primarily Peru, some of it in Chile. Okay, and so then instead of, because they didn't have, again, horses, they had people run messages back and forth, runners. And then this is the dry stone masonry I was telling you about. Right here, I'll show you a better example in a second. And then they're also known for their cloth. Peruvian cloth to this day is still really fancy and a lot of different colors. I had a girl bring some in one time. Her family spoke Quechua. They were Peruvian. It was really interesting. And then their way of keeping track of records is known as a quipu. You're going to want to write that one down. Quipu. The quipu. It was because they didn't have a writing system. That was how they kept records. Okay. Here's an example of a few things here. The bottom left is a road that they built. So they weren't as sophisticated of roads as the Romans had. But again, they didn't have that close to that technology. You can see the dry stone masonry. Here's how they would get over like mountain passes. You can see the bridges. This bridge still exists to this day. And they actually have a festival where they fix the bridge every year in Peru and honor their ancestors. Okay, this is an example of the dry stone masonry I was telling you about. Unbelievable. Can you imagine trying to move those rocks with humans and then making sure that they were carved and they fit together, and then they are still standing 500 years later after earthquakes and weather and all that stuff? Again, that's why I think is so impressive. Take a look at the bridge. Again, this is the one bridge that still exists that they have festivals to every year. Okay, that was their ability to tie knots on strings. This is the quipu. This is how they would keep track of how much people paid in their taxes. Okay, each one of these would be a numbers holder. So tomorrow, maybe I'll upload an activity and we'll put some numbers in using the quipus. Okay, that could be something fun to do tomorrow. And then here's a more elaborate quipu. Each color would mean a different record. Like, let's say like Davion paid, her village paid this much in taxes, and they would be able to keep track of this. And then, Chris, your village paid, and they kept track of your records on this color, and it just changed. And like you and I look at this, and we're like, oh, maybe this is like a necklace or something. But literally, this was how they kept track of things without a numerical system or a like a writing system to write down numbers. Okay, which is pretty interesting. Okay, also they did have bronze and iron, or not iron, sorry, bronze and gold metal as well, that when the Europeans found this, they were very apt to steal it and take it as treasure. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and cut you guys off here. Thank you for listening. Those of you that are on Zoom, your intro is due at 11 o'clock today. Hopefully you got it done yesterday. I think it's only 12 questions. Okay, so you will want to answer those, get them turned in as soon as possible, okay? And then any other missing assignments, like if you didn't do the quiz on Monday like I had asked, send me your score after you take it, okay? If you're coming into class today, you'll have the opportunity, or tomorrow, you'll have the opportunity to do the homework by hand and not have to print it off, or the activity, and you won't have to you will not have to do it on virtually if you don't want to. Okay. All right. If you don't have any questions, you guys can get out of here on Zoom. Thank you. I got attendance for everyone. All right. Chris, can you turn all the lights on?